your girl, Camille B, the HR counselor. I am super excited to have this conversation. So the conversation today is going to be forced DEI sessions and its impact with Mrs. Quiana McCants. She is the founder of the Lacy Legacy Company. Welcome again, Quiana. Long time no see. So let's talk about it. Forced DEI session and its impact.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me back. You have an amazing show with amazing topics. I'm just honored to be here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, when we were thinking about this topic, forced DEI sessions, that's the buzz right now. DEI training, new DEI directors are popping up in companies that never had departments at all. It's all over the place. And when I think about force DEI sessions and their impact in companies' culture, it can vary across the board depending on their strategies. One of the things that I want to outline is that there's a difference between DEI training and ongoing DEI activities, right? Just like there's a difference between learning and development activities, right? Ongoing versus learning and development trainings. For example, a learning and development activity could be your performance reviews. That's something that happens, right? All the time. But your learning and development training could be how to write performance reviews.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. But when it gets to DEI, it's a trickier topic because diversity, and I think we talked about this before, diversity is a word that's just thrown around all over the place. And it's oversaturated when it comes to company culture. And because diversity is not something that can be removed, right? Even if you have a group of all the same gender, of all the same race, there's still some diversity in that room by definition, because diversity is your different experiences that create your thought process.
Absolutely.
The real activities and trainings start when you discuss equity and inclusion. Okay. So equity activities may look something like a pay equity review. That's an activity rooted in equity. It could be reviewing your hiring practices on an annual basis, an audit for your recruiters. A training opportunity analysis technically is an activity, because are we allowing the right people to go to the development trainings to have a fair shot at the next position that requires these learnings? So you have this analysis, but then you think of equity trainings different from activities. Your trainings could be how to source more diverse candidates. Teaching how to create opportunities that close these wealth gaps or these leadership position gaps that we have. And then you have inclusion. And I think people confuse inclusion with the other two categories.
Right.
That's right. They interchange them. So when you have an inclusion activity, that could be celebrating a cultural holiday, Black History Month, Women's History Month, all these different things. Even having a strategy brainstorming session or a survey where you have different voices and different levels of the company at the table, that's an inclusion activity when you're looking to listen. But then when you have an inclusion training, which is a little bit different, right? That could be an active listening class. That's technically an inclusion training, because you're teaching people how to hear someone else through, regardless of what your thoughts are. Can you hear what that other person is saying? So active listening. But the most common inclusion training out there is what? Unconscious bias, right? Just floating around. And sometimes it shouldn't be an unconscious bias class. It's let's talk about your actual bias, your deliberate bias, your well-known bias that you sit and talk about at the dinner table. And I think, bias, it gets this bad word. It gets this bad name. That, bias means bad. And maybe because they both start with B. I don't know why I get that. But bias is normal.
Right.
Because your biases are also rooted in your experiences as well.
Yeah. Cultural,
religious, all these different things that you may have. And even when you think of food, right? if you grew up and every time your mom cooked this one dish, it was absolutely horrible and you had to sit at the table until you finished it, if someone else positions that menu item or that food item to you, they're like, no.
No,
And it could be
not.
that mom just didn't know how to make that item, but that if you have it, if someone else makes it, it was actually pretty good. That's a bias that has been created in our experiences. And when you transition to now the impact, right? I think where people go right or where they go astray is rooted in their strategy. And I have the 3 I's for the strategy. And those 3 I's are intent, implementation, and insight. So when you're thinking about rolling out a diversity, equity, inclusion program or trainings or inclusion activities, is that intent defined? What are you wanting to come out of that? Okay. And then your implementation for the big companies, right? They may have a small group of people at the table deciding that they want to have this new program, but then they roll it out to all the middle managers to implement it without giving them the intent, the training to support that. And they're losing some of the mission along the way. And then insight, after we do these activities, now what? Now what? We did the activity. What did I learn? What am I going to change, if anything at all? And those 3 things, those 3 I's lead to how you are impacting your culture, how you are impacting your productivity, how you're potentially impacting your turnover in all those different ways. You know, when I think of strategic planning, if you're missing any one of those pieces, any one of those, your impact is going to be all over the place. Okay. So the companies that have all the I's dotted, those are the ones that we don't see in the news.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, why would they? Why would they be in the news? Because they've covered all of their bases. That's where all of this forced DEI sessions and its impact. And I'm so glad that you mentioned those 3 I's, because it's so important for us to understand its intent and implementation and insight. A lot of organizations they are like robots. They're just doing it. They're performative. And that's a concern, right? And so I'm so happy that we're having this conversation, but please continue, because right now it's not okay to be performative, not in 2022.
Right. No. And when you see the companies who are in the news, right, who do have the error, they jump straight to implementation. Straight to implementation. Typically, the implementation is either sensitivity training or unconscious bias. And what happens then when you jump straight to implementation training or unconscious bias? We've missed an entire group of team members that would have never did that activity to get you in the news in the first place. But now they're all lumped into one, right? You guys all have to take this sensitivity training, or you all have to take this unconscious bias training, where when you have the person that made this error or behavioral error or intentional or non-intentional, you have people that work next to them to say, I'm not surprised. They've been doing this for months. Why do I have to sit through the training? I don't need it. So now you're discrediting DEI as a whole because we're putting this punitive lens on it, right? We wouldn't have had to take this training had you not kicked these people out for doing nothing. Had you left them in our door, had you not harassed them with these type of questions, right? You create this potentially now subculture. Now, the thing about subcultures, though, you can't actually avoid them. You can influence them, though, greatly with how you are normally set up. So let's use, you have a coffee shop, right? Somebody's sitting there, they get kicked out. They actually bought some coffee, right? But they're getting kicked out. They're being treated as loitering. Now you have this massive, DEI unconscious bias, where even though it was very conscious what they did, very conscious bias was executed on. The rest of the people are like, now I have to be sitting in this room. I'm bad. I'm racist. I'm uncaring. And we have to do better, right? And then you have people, now we're going to get into where it's sticky. You have race, okay? That plays a part of this. You have this Caucasian or white person who kicked out an African-American or a brown person, right? So now you have the other people who are white or Caucasian or lighter skin races across the country and say, now I have to be looped into what you did. Now I'm also considered the bad guy. And now I
Yes.
have to be defensive, right? So they don't want to
Right.
do it either. They're like, I didn't even do it. And every time these trainings come up, it's about how bad we are as a people.
Right.
So you put this very black and white line into what you're doing. So now you're creating these groups. And what happens after these trainings, people don't just go back to their regular lives and work in their office or make the coffee or do whatever their role is doing. They talk to each other,
Hmm.
right? And they complain to each other.
Absolutely.
About having to
Absolutely.
go through the process. Can you believe I had to do that? I can't, I'm sick of this. And even if you take it a little deeper, right, there's this active movement about critical race theory, which I think is very, very important to DEI.
Yes.
Okay. And the reason why I bring up critical race theory, you have an entire group of people that are saying, get rid of those history books. Don't talk about it anymore. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. And I don't believe it's because they're trying to hide history. I think that the feeling is, I'm tired of every time a story comes up, it's me that's the bad guy. And they're
Yeah.
saying I wasn't there. And I'd rather you not talk about it. But what we're missing on the other side of that, which is why we cannot get rid of this literature, get rid of these things, we have to acknowledge that experience of how it's supposed to always be pointed out as the bad guy. But on the other side, the impact to realize that we are first generation full rights. My mom was not born with full rights. When she was born, people who look like us could not vote. My grandmother was not born into full rights. And that as we're transitioning, there is a reason why people of color from various parts of the world are where they are at an economic level, where they're at a professional level, and what their feelings are and look like in the workplace. Because as much as we want to say these things no longer exist and that there's these biases, that's why the news stories still happen in the first place.
Because
That's why you have a forced DEI session in the first place, because somebody is still acting some kind of way based on what someone looks like, sounds like, where they're from, their gender, their age, all of these different things. We have to get rid of the thought, though, of saying that the bias is the bad word. And if we incorporate these continuous learning activities, these continuous equity activities, and we can filter in trainings, then we miss the forced DEI session altogether. So if something happens, it's not everybody come to the table. How could this one thing happen and impact our national company across the board when now you can handle that situation?
So, yeah, because now it's an outlier.
And now it's an outlier. This is not our culture. And it's not just about putting a statement together either and saying, we apologize. This does not align with our policies. This does not align with our values. We already know that. We already know what you put on paper. What we're trying to remind you of, company A or company B, is that you've actually hired human beings. So regardless of what you put on the paper, regardless of what you say your company culture is, you've hired people that are not effectively executing. And you've had this one incident to go really, really big. We want to know what the other things that you're putting in place. We don't actually want to hear about your unconscious bias class either, because we already know that it's a check mark, right? And just like your team members, and it didn't actually solve any problems, because the last I, right, the insight,
right.
Did you follow up with us? I mean, it's in the news, so now we need to know what's happening, right? So you can't just give us, first chapter and not tell us chapter 2 and 3, but what did you learn from this so-called training? And you'll find that when you, like I said, when you throw out this unconscious bias, that it wasn't unconscious at all.
No.
It was very conscious and deliberate. And that you missed your equity activities. You missed your inclusion activities along the way, the active listening. And I think a great activity that not enough companies teach to is half SWOT. I don't know if you're familiar with SWOT analysis. Strength,
weaknesses.
Take off the S&W, because that's more about your finances and your numbers. And you can redefine the O and the T, the opportunities and the threats. And when you redefine that piece as an equity and inclusion activity, now you can teach to what is an actual business opportunity. These guys sitting in my shop, not causing any problem, actually purchasing. If they stay a little longer, maybe they'll get a refill. Now, I'm not at capacity with the line out the door, so I don't actually need this table. And then redefine threat. What is threatening to my business? Maybe somebody, if I have security procedures, maybe somebody waiting up against my front door before I'm open and now I can't go in. Maybe that is a threat.
Right.
And we start to redefine what business looks like and how to operate in a world where biases exist, different experiences exist, and reanalyze where we're at on a continuous basis. You can do that through your visits. You can do that through your coaching. You can do that through your onboarding. There's so many different ways to implement that. And then you get rid of altogether this forced DEI and make DEI part of your culture. Right. And it doesn't even have to be called DEI. You can roll it into your learning and development department. And I think the moment we even sometimes use that verbiage, and it's needed, okay? So I'm not saying get rid of DEI sessions, please.
No, not absolutely. No,
but
no.
Roll these.
We are not there.
These pieces, it's not an individual category because it's so intertwined and connected into the entire business that I think as a whole, we haven't figured out how to really incorporate it because we're still learning on all sides.
Right. We are definitely still learning. And what really caught my ear, and I appreciate the fact that you brought out the point of the unconscious bias, right? Because we always have trainings, we always talk about it, unconscious. But a lot of people, they are aware, right, of their biases. And sometimes it could be the way they were raised, their religious beliefs. And I'm a proponent. I've always believed, I don't think it's my job to change who you are as a person. That's up to you. Everyone has to make that decision or feel that there's a reason for them to change. However, in the workplace, as we're navigating this thing called life, we still must be aware. You can have all the conscious bias you want. You can have the unconscious or the conscious. When you navigate and you coming up in this building, well, not in this building, this is my house, but when you're at work, you need to act accordingly. When you're navigating through the world, going from business to business, you need to act accordingly. That's where it's more about, because people are not going to just change because we're giving them these these trainings or having these conversations. And first of all, a lot, as you mentioned, people are annoyed. A lot of them do. A lot of people on both sides, various different races, cultures, ethnicities, genders, sexual orientation, they don't like it either. Right. They're like, why I gotta do this? I don't care about this. You do you. You do you and I do me and mind my business.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's how a lot of employees feel. So if we really take and define those 3 I's and start embedding them in our culture, right, the culture of the organization, the intent, the implementation, and the insight, then we wouldn't have to jump through all these hoops, because that's what we're doing right now. And I don't know about you, but I'd be tired of all this jumping. It's like every time you turn around, it's like, oh, we got to do this initiative. We got to do this other initiative. And if we are getting to the point that we're a little over it, how much more so are the employees? Because they can tell, once again, that it is performative. So what do we do? The question for you, Ms. Quiana, what do we do? What do organizations do? What do CEOs and your C-suites? Because I always say, you can tell HR whatever you want. It starts with the C-suite and it trickles down. If the C-suite is like, okay, this is what we stand for. As an organization, I don't care what you do at your house, that's your business. But when you walk in these doors, this is what it's about. You better know how to go along to get along when you get here. You know what I mean? You're going to not always agree with everything, but we're going to be respectful and we're going to give people their dignity. And so when that is trickled down, and it's not just a statement that an organization slaps against the wall or gives you on the top of your handbook or the code of conduct, but it's really embedded in the culture and the feelings and what that organization stands for, that's when you know it's real and it's not forced. So how can organizations get to a place where it's no longer forced?
My recommendation, if someone were to ask me what you're asking me, right? And they had to look at their DEI mission statement, it's whatever that they're going to put out in the news or on their website about how they support diversity and equity inclusion. Start with that statement. Start with that statement, because for us in the community, when we see that statement, it's after something has gone wrong. Yeah. And now it's fluff. But if you really want to live that statement, then go right back to it. And that's your next meeting topic. And then break it down into the 3 I's for each. Your 3 I's for your diversity, your 3 I's, your intent, implementation, and insight for your equity, right? Your insight, your implementation, your all of those different things for your inclusion. And then decide, what does that actually look like? I know what it doesn't look like. Channel 5 or Channel 10 or whatever the news station is just told me what it doesn't look like. They just told me, and now I have to show this statement. So what would it look like if we were actually living those things in all of our departments, not just HR, right? HR gets a lot of the assignments on a lot of different things, but that's not the job. You have strategists, you have analytic departments that can analyze data for you. You have learning and development. You have frontline managers who's going to end up on the news, right? Your frontline, because that's who works with the public. That's who's getting video taped and recorded and put on social media. So start with analyzing, how am I, as the leader or on this leaderboard of the company, ensuring that the other leaders can live and breathe this? Not just me in my executive room, but if I were to go to any of my establishments, how do I know, without asking any questions, that the person who just got hired, that's working the register, knows how we live this mission? And what they'll find is that they probably can't answer some of those questions. And then that's where you start. If I can't answer the question of how does my frontline manager implement these initiatives, or how is my analytics department coming up with solutions based on the insights that they found from their data, from their surveys, from their audits, and how are we leveraging that information with our strategy department to come up with a plan where we've identified our own gaps? And how do I do that in a way to where I'm not taking away the human element? I'm not going to take away that people are still going to talk about whatever activities that we do, that they're going to talk about with people who they feel safe talking to about it, right? The subcultures. As soon as they hang up on the DEI call, they're like, ooh, can you believe that they said A, B, and C? I know, that's why I hate those calls. That's why, I can't stand. And they go about their business and you miss the mission. So I would start with just asking yourself some questions. What is our mission, and how do I know we're living it? How do I know? And not just in my boardroom. How do I know that every department lives this? And a lot of people, they don't know. So that's where you start. Okay, well, what would I need to see to know that that's happening? What kind of ongoing, right? Because people are always going to hire. There's always going to be turnover. Someone's always going to retire eventually. So there's always somebody new coming into the door. And I would ask them to, what ongoing process do I have to make sure that this is alive, that my mission is breathing? Because you can put anything you want on a piece of paper. It doesn't really matter. A piece of paper is not alive. It cannot talk to us. We can read it. It does not have feelings. If we tear the piece of paper in half, the piece of paper is not crying. None of that. So
absolutely not.
How can I make sure that there's breath in this idea? And then acknowledge when you don't, and don't try to hide it. Here's the gap. We've acknowledged. We've acknowledged that I don't know as a leader, and I think that's a humble approach. I don't know if we're doing this to the best of our ability every day. If I'm giving all of my talented team members the opportunity to grow and develop. If I'm acknowledging that people have a lot of talent, but that they come from different experiences and backgrounds that may have prevented them from having this class or this educational opportunity to prepare them for this next role. Even though I know they can execute that role, they still need these credentials. How am I leveraging all of that information? And what am I doing to bring forth the best company possible? Knowing that there's always going to be your one-off. And that when we have our one-off, because it may not be today, our one-off may not be tomorrow, our news story may not be next week, but when it comes, we're not shaken because we're confident in what we do, and we can address that humans make mistakes and that we have the ability to hold people accountable and to continue with our mission, because our mission is right and it's alive and it's breathing and it's moving.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it because I think it's so important that, like you said, HR can't be the catch-all. And we are so spread thin as it is already. It's like everything is coming our way and we can't control every single thing that happens in an organization as much as we try. There needs to be other accountability partners. That's what I like to call them, right? Accountability partners. But that accountability needs to start with your CEO, your C-suite. All of the leaders that are part of that C-suite, they need to be accountable so that they can trickle down the expectation. And I don't think that always happens. Like, again, there's a lot of performative conversations that take place, when you have your meetings, your organizational meetings, and they're saying the right thing, and you can tell it's very, very scripted. But to have that real open conversation, like, look, I don't know. And we don't always get it right, but we are open to doing better. We are trying to do better and getting input from other people. I think it's so good to have ERGs, right? Because that's important too, because the group, maybe you have a group of Caucasian people, some Caucasian males, Caucasian females, and they're like annoyed with these DEI efforts or all of this unconscious bias training. And they're like, I'm not doing this, or they're going and they're doing their work. They're not even listening. But if you had an ERG group where they felt that they could share their experience and how this makes them feel, and individuals from various different backgrounds, ethnicities, they could share their feelings and it be a place of respect, then it would open up for that dialogue. And then it could be real change and not the performative or that forced DEI. So I'm with it all day long. I love the fact about how we need to analyze the how we are doing things and ensuring that it's getting done. But most importantly, I love the fact that take it off of HR and let's start handing it to different groups. Not to say that we're not in the shadows looking, right? But
Right.
to make sure it's done accordingly. But so more accountable people, let's take it to the hand, because we don't manage people.
Right.
Right. We're the catch-all. So let's have the managers be more involved in that and take responsibility, and for them to share even their experiences, have something where the managers are getting additional training, because these are hard conversations to have. They're very difficult, especially if you were, as the manager, maybe you were raised with biases or vice versa, right? Or you have a manager of a different race and you thought a different thing. And now you're working with individuals who don't look like you, who don't think like you maybe, and you start to, or you don't think that they think like you, and you find out, oh, wow, yes, we do. Yes, we do. But you won't ever really get to that place if we're continuing to have these forced DEI sessions. At least that's what I think, because people aren't comfortable right now, but it's the new cool thing. It's like having those new fresh pair of Nikes, you know what I mean? Like, everybody wants them. They look good. And then after a while, you kick them and put them in the corner and you're not wearing them anymore. And that's kind of what we're doing with this DEI initiative right now. It's the new cool kid on the block.
The new cool kid. Something that I love that you said is where it starts, right? It starts in that executive boardroom, starts with your CEO, your CFO, your COOs, right? And even if they go back to those questions that I posed, ask them how they're living it and breathing it in that room.
Right.
In their own room, right? Look around and who do they see? And I'm not talking about, right, all white men at different ages, because that is a diversity component.
Right. Age is a diversity, yeah.
Or some that have a military background, or some that went to this school or didn't go to. That's not what I'm talking about. Are there some differences that you can visibly see?
See.
Because those are the ones that get called out. right? Those are the ones that show up on the TV. And then when you think about the ones that you don't see, how are you accommodating something that you're blind to?
Right.
And now that you talked about that management level, that training, it's not only about making them comfortable, it's making them better coaches and better leaders, and how to provide feedback in a way that's engaging, how to provide feedback in a way that's received too. Because if you have someone that you have to receive feedback from, but you feel that they have these biases that no matter what you do, the feedback is not going to change, then now you've lost some of the ground to make progress. So even, like I said, putting them through equity trainings, not the activities, those are policy-based, those are your analytics department. It doesn't mean that those departments don't need the trainings as well, but they're responsible for certain roles that we play, right? The continuous leadership activities of performance reviews. I've been in leadership a long time. I've seen some amazing performance reviews, and I've seen some that probably should end up in court, right? If it is related to someone's raise or the lack of them getting promoted because of what's written there. When you have these equity trainings and these leadership trainings, those are actually DEI trainings, right? When you're onboarding, that's a DEI activity. How you choose to get to know someone that is coming in your building to work with you is a DEI activity. It's so much bigger than a department, which is why I said it can't all fall on HR. It's so much bigger than the buzzword or the cool thing to do that's happening right now with companies. It's a way of operating. It's a way of living. It's a way of communicating. It's a way of interpreting information. It's a way of understanding. Absolutely. And we're missing those other pieces.
Yes.
But we're not missing unconscious bias. You better show up for that, though. Better show up for unconscious bias. We're not missing that.
But you know what's funny? So we have these trainings, right? And we're like, everybody has to take unconscious bias training, and you take it. But what did you get out of the training? That's what I've always, I've kind of walked away. I mean, I literally, and I hate to say it, but I could just, sometimes they make you take an assessment after you take certain trainings. And I remember like many times in my career where I've seen them so much that I would just skip through and get to the assessment piece. Because I didn't need to because I know what's coming next. Right. And it's, again, that's that performative, right? Now it's almost like 2 times 2. It's repetition. It's the memory. I'm using that muscle memory because I've heard it or seen the presentation so many times. So for me, it's like, okay, where do we get to a point where it's not performative, but they really understand, number one, what is the expectation? That's whenever you do a training, that's the first thing. What are you expecting for your audience to get out of this? Mm-hmm. What is the goal? What is the purpose? Like, please don't have me sitting in the training because I'm almost 50. I ain't got time to be wasting. No, right. I can't get those times in my life back. Those minutes, they're gone, right? So it's like, okay, what is the purpose of this training? What do we expect for these individuals to get out of the training? And what do we expect for them to do with the training after it's all said and done? How are they going to use this in their everyday working life? Because let's be real. I mean, they may take it home with them, but the training is so that they can navigate the work environment.
Right.
So we ask those questions, but what do we really? I think if we're so polite now.
We are.
Sometimes I do wish we just keep it real. Like, what do you want? You want people to stop calling people words at work that they shouldn't? Well, then say that.
Say that.
Say that. I wish we could, and I'm a pretty polite person myself. But sometimes you just gotta, as my kids say, keep it real. Keep it a buck. Like, what is the expectation? What are we really asking? What is the ask? Mm-hmm. And I think employees, they kind of want that. They want to know that we're not wasting their time. And for a lot of individuals, they feel like these trainings are a waste of their time. They could be doing something else. They could be wrapping up their work, finishing a task, finishing a project, but yet we have them in an hour training. For what? So that's why we need to be clear and concise with our messaging. What is the purpose? Whenever that's when we were kids, they said who, what, where, when, and why, and how. We need to be able to answer all of that when we're telling people we want you to take this training.
Yeah.
What is the purpose?
You're so spot on with that too. And I think a powerful question to ask after the training, and maybe it needs to be anonymous so that you get real answers and not fake anonymous where you figure it out who said what, but actually really anonymous. But just ask them, based off this training, do you have a different viewpoint on someone else's experience that will impact how you interact or communicate with them?
Say that again. I had to write that one down. I like that.
I probably should have wrote it down myself, but when you get done, but when you think about the insight, right, that last I, that's where people are leaving because they're like, oh, that's done. And then nothing, right? You got to do it again in 6 months or a year. But if you go back to your intent based off of this training that you got here today or that you participated in, did something happen that changed your viewpoint on someone else's experience that will promote your behavior to change with how you communicate with them, interact with them, or even how you see them from an anonymous standpoint?
I love
if
that.
the answer is no, because sometimes our biases don't change. These trainings don't impact it. People still go home and they still feel XYZ about ABC.
They're still having those Archie Bunker conversations.
They're still having the same conversation. So was your training impactful, and did it meet the intent that you were trying to accomplish? And if it did not, do you feel like that was a good use of time?
And believe me, when it's anonymous and they feel like it's really anonymous, they're going to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
They're going to tell, and sometimes, the truth hurts. But then the ask is, or the question is, what do you do with it then? Right? Now that you know how they really feel, what's your plan of action? Because there has to be a plan of action. You have to be able to take that data and do something with it. Yeah. How? Because apparently we're not communicating it in a way. There's going to be some people, now don't get me wrong, there's going to be some people, we could say whatever, the sky could open up and they're just like, nope, doesn't work for me. Yeah. But for, it still depends on, once you do your data analysis, and you'll be able to see how many people feel that way, then you can make some changes. But for the most part, that data will really help you to see what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong.
And I think too, if you were to take that survey and you got those answers, like, no, my opinion doesn't change about how I feel. Maybe you have a one-off that if someone tells a really heartwarming story or something that triggers some emotions, but if you're getting those answers that no, it didn't make a difference. Like, I'm still who I am. I still believe what I believe in, which is probably going to be more common than not. Then another follow-up question is, make it about them, right? What could we do as a company to make you feel more seen as an individual, right? Not just valued, because then you're going to raise my money, which is probably a few companies should be raising salaries, but raise my salary, give me more candy, more food or time off or whatever those things, but be very intentional about your question. What can we do to make you feel more seen as an individual? Now that's an insightful question. It's about me. Like, you realize that you don't see me after work. You don't see what I'm struggling with. You don't see what I had to do before work to even show up here with a smile on my face. And yes, I was 2 minutes late, but you have no idea what I'm going through. And it doesn't take away from my talent and my ability. So what can we do as a company to see you? We want to see you as of this whole person. There's this thing, right? Bring your whole self to work. People can't do that. That's not a real thing.
Because you're not ready.
You're not ready. People bring your whole self to work. You think HR is busy now? Oh my gosh, HR is going to.
I'm gonna be in HR if I bring
Yeah, you're going to be we're all going to be in HR, because now you're saying, as a being, we acknowledge that you have different emotions, that you're acting on different emotions. We know what you really think about this group of people, or this gender of people, or these people with this level of experience. We know all of that. And that's a really dangerous playground to be in. But instead, just what can we do? And I think that if you analyze that, since companies do have cultures, right, subcultures, but even if you broke it down into groups or a company as a whole, I think that's an insightful question where you'll be able to identify themes. And your themes will relate to either equity, where you can do some more activities, that's your analysis, or maybe some additional trainings, or your theme is going to be around inclusion. I have all these ideas of how this could work better, but because of my level, my ideas don't matter, right?
Right.
Inclusion, the voice, listening, that's where the active listening activities come into place. The leadership training around situational leadership, impactful environments, all these different pieces. Just ask, what can we do to see you?
Absolutely. What can we do to see you? And stop saying bring your whole self to work.
Yeah, please don't bring your whole self to work. We don't know what we're going to get if we do that.
You know, and I think when they say that, they're trying to tell people that it's okay to be who you are. But, you know, when you say whole self, depending on who's hearing that, they're like, okay, so I'm gonna come in with my PJ bottoms and I'm, you know, or I get to whatever I'm going through, I get to bring it to work. Now, I'm a proponent, one of those HR people who feel you're dealing with real life human beings that have emotions and are going through things every single day. And we don't know what it is that they're navigating. However, while they're at work, we want to make their experience a good one, because we don't know what they're going through. That for some people, the workplace is their safe haven. Really, that is their escape. That is where they get to go for 8-9 hours and just not worry about whatever's going on in their personal life. So I am a fan of, you get to be who you are, but you know you're at work.
Right.
But you know you're at work. Like, come on. There's going to be certain things that you just can't do at work because you're working.
If you're at work.
This is a business. This is a place of business. If everyone was to being their whole self at work, then everyone would be running like this was the Wild Wild West, because everyone would get to do whatever they wanted. Then how are we talking about unconscious bias training when we're telling everyone to bring their whole authentic self to work? I want you to be who you are. I want people to be true to who they are deep down. So bring your authentic self to work, but understand that you are at work, and we wouldn't have policies, procedures, code of conduct, or a handbook if we wanted you to just do whatever you wanted to do. So that, you know, we need to be careful, especially we have a new generation coming into the workforce learning, and we can't just say things willy-nilly out here. And I think I'm seeing an uptick in cases, you know, with employee relation issues and managers stressed and frustrated because they don't understand their employees and the employees don't understand them. And that's because it's almost like we're giving out mixed messages. Bring your whole self. Oh, but you can't do that. Well, then that's the problem. We're saying one thing, but we're doing another. You got to make yes be yes and no be no. Now, I want you to do certain things, but then we need to say, but the caveat is this. You know, you literally have to explain to people now that what is acceptable and what is not acceptable at work. And there are some things in a business setting that is not acceptable. I don't care what you do, but we do live in a society now where, you know, people do feel like it's anything go. And it's like, nah, I don't care who you are. The president has rules. Everybody has someone telling them what to do. And to an extent, right? Even if you're a business owner, your accountant tells you what to do. So we have, you know, we all have limits to what, you know, how far we should push it. And so we do need to be careful with that. Bring your whole self to work. I'm in agreement with that for sure.
Yeah. Bring your whole self to work, except for your discriminatory behaviors, except for your random outbursts, except for your abusive tactics, right?
Yeah.
So, and these things, but these are part of human behaviors. These are things that people deal with. So, and I don't tell people ever bring your whole self to work because I don't know what I'm going to get. What I can say is, here's our mission, here's our goals, and that you may have beliefs that don't align to this. I would like to not discredit your beliefs. That's not my job. That's a heavy job. That does not belong to me. But my job as a leader is to show you different perspectives and viewpoints that may give you a different experience to allow you to potentially have a different viewpoint. That's my job.
Absolutely. Yes. And I love the fact that you just said it's not your job to change the narrative for them. Now, if we can win one over, win one individual, we're like, yes, but we have to understand that we don't wear capes. We're not saviors. You know what I mean? Like we're not superhumans. Our goal is to just make sure that they understand what the culture of the organization and what the mission is, what's the vision, and make sure that this is something they want to do. Because if it's not in alignment with their values, then we may not be the place they want to be. And that's okay too.
And that's okay.
That is okay too, because I always tell people, whether you're here or not, I want you to be happy, because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, your happiness as an individual. And it may not be with us. Our fundamental values may not be in sync. Mm-hmm. This was so good. Quiana, you know you're the bomb to be, because you're so insightful. This was such an amazing conversation. So tell the people how they can get a hold of you if they want to know more.
Okay, so I can be reached on Facebook with the Lacy Legacy Company. I am also on Instagram at QC McCants, and they can inbox me on both places. They can find my email addresses in both places to reach out to me for consultations as well as conversations around my new book.
Awesome. And tell the people, what's the new book? Come on, don't be shy. Tell them what's the new book.
I have my copy here, Black Economics, the Journey and Activity Plan to Holistic Health. It's actually a finance book that takes Black history into consideration to help people with the mental health aspect of changing their life for the positive when it comes to your finances.
I love it.
Everyone.
Yes, for everyone, because we are inclusive over here. Absolutely. I love it. I love it. I adore you, Quiana. Thank you so much. And as always, it's been a wonderful conversation. Again, this is your girl, Camille B., the HR counselor. Don't forget to like it, share it, comment if you have any comments, and subscribe. Until next time.